Once upon a time, in a place where the ocean kissed the edge of an ancient forest, there lived a turtle unlike any other. His name was Meridian, and he was very, very old. So old, in fact, that the trees themselves had been saplings when he first crawled onto the shore. His shell was weathered and beautiful, etched with patterns that looked like ripples frozen in time, and his eyes held the quiet wisdom of countless sunrises. But Meridian had a gift that made him truly special. He was a collector, not of precious gems or shiny trinkets, but of something far more delicate and fleeting. Meridian collected sounds. Every morning, as the first light painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Meridian would wake from his sleep beneath the roots of an enormous fig tree. He would stretch his ancient legs one at a time, feeling the cool earth beneath his feet. Then, with great care, he would make his way down to the shoreline, where the waves met the sand in their eternal dance. The beach was scattered with seashells of every size and shape, smooth spirals, delicate scallops, tiny cowries that gleamed like porcelain. But Meridian didn't choose just any shell. He would walk slowly, very slowly, listening with his whole being until he found exactly the right one, a shell that sang to him, that felt hollow and perfect, waiting to be filled. When he found such a shell, Meridian would settle himself down, his body becoming as still as stone, and he would wait. He would wait for the sound to come to him. Sometimes it was the whisper of wind through seagrass, each blade singing its own small song. Sometimes it was the laughter of waves tumbling over smooth stones. Sometimes it was the patter of rain on calm water, each drop creating circles that spread and disappeared into the vastness. And when the perfect sound arrived, Meridian would hold his chosen shell up to capture it, letting the sound flow in and settle like light filling a bottle. Then he would seal the shell with a tiny drop of amber tree sap, preserving the sound inside forever. His collection lived in a cave by the water's edge, arranged on shelves of stone that sparkled with flecks of mica. Hundreds of shells, perhaps thousands, each one holding a moment of the world's music.
The forest behind the beach had its own personality, its own rhythm and breath. In the early days, when Meridian first began his collection, the forest had been a peaceful place. Birds sang their territorial songs at dawn and dusk. Deer moved silently through the undergrowth. The wind played gentle melodies through the canopy. Meridian would venture into the forest on cool afternoons, when the sun slanted through the trees in golden beams. He moved so slowly that the forest barely noticed him. Butterflies would land on his shell to rest. Small lizards would sun themselves on his back, mistaking him for a warm rock. In those quiet moments, he would collect the sounds of the forest. The creak of an old oak tree swaying, the rustle of a fox passing through autumn leaves, the hushed flutter of an owl's wings at twilight, the drip, drip, drip of morning dew falling from fern fronds onto the soft moss below. Each sound was a treasure, a small piece of the world's beauty captured and kept safe. For many years, this was Meridian's life, simple, peaceful, full of wonder at the ordinary magic that most creatures rushed past without noticing. But as seasons turned into years and years stretched into decades, something in the forest began to change. More animals arrived, fleeing from distant places where the world had grown harsh. They brought with them new sounds, louder sounds, urgent sounds. The once quiet forest became crowded and busy. Birds argued over nesting spots, their calls sharp and insistent. Monkeys chattered from dawn until long after dark, their voices bouncing off the trees. Wild boars crashed through the underbrush, grunting and snorting. A family of parrots took up residence and spent their days squawking opinions about everything and nothing. The newcomers built their homes quickly, without thought for harmony. They competed for the best trees, the sweetest fruit, the clearest streams. Everyone was rushing, always rushing, as if stillness itself had become dangerous. The forest grew loud, so loud that the older residents, the gentle deer, the contemplative owls, the shy rabbits, began to feel overwhelmed. They couldn't hear themselves think. They couldn't find rest. Even sleep became difficult as the noise continued into the night. Meridian watched all of this with his ancient eyes, saying nothing. He continued his morning walks to the beach, continued his slow afternoon wanderings, continued collecting his sounds. But now, finding a moment of true quiet required great patience. The wind's whisper was drowned out by shouting. The rain's song was lost beneath the constant chatter. One evening, as purple dusk settled over the forest, a young deer named Celia stumbled down to the shore. Her eyes were rimmed with red. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. She had not slept properly in many, many nights. She found Meridian arranging new shells on his cave shelves, each movement deliberate and calm. "Please," Celia whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please, wise turtle. I can't sleep. None of us can sleep. The forest is too loud, too busy, too much. My mother says you're the oldest creature here. Surely you must know what to do. How do we make it quiet again?" Meridian turned his head slowly to look at the young deer. In her anxious eyes, he saw the suffering of the entire forest, all the creatures who had forgotten how to rest, how to simply be. "The noise cannot be silenced by force," Meridian said, his voice like distant thunder, soft and deep. "Sound is neither good nor bad. It simply is.
but I may be able to help you remember something you have forgotten." "What have I forgotten?" Celia asked. "How to listen," Meridian replied.
Word spread quickly through the forest that the ancient turtle had agreed to help. By the following evening, dozens of animals had gathered on the beach. Deer and rabbits, owls and badgers, foxes and field mice. Even some of the newcomers arrived, curious about what the old turtle could possibly do to solve their problem. The sun was setting, painting the sky in layers of orange, pink, and deep violet. The ocean breathed its eternal rhythm against the shore, and there, at the edge of the water, sat Meridian. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he simply sat, his weathered shell catching the last rays of sunlight, his presence as steady as a mountain. The animals fidgeted. They whispered to each other. Some of the louder ones started to complain about wasting time, but Meridian remained still. Gradually, one by one, the animals grew quieter. Something about the turtle's profound calm began to affect them. Their nervous energy started to settle, like silt drifting down through water. When at last the beach was nearly silent, with only the sound of waves and wind, Meridian finally spoke. "Tonight," he said, "I will teach you what I have learned in my very long life. I will teach you that the world has always been full of sound, but it is only when we learn to truly listen that we discover which sounds heal us, which sounds nourish us, which sounds remind us of who we really are." He paused, letting his words sink in like rain into dry earth. He continued, "We will begin with something simple. We will begin with breath."
"Close your eyes," instructed Meridian gently. "All of you. Let your eyelids fall like leaves drifting down." The animals obeyed, though some more reluctantly than others. The cynical parrot kept one eye cracked open. The anxious rabbits' noses still twitched nervously. "Now," Meridian said, "listen to your own breathing. Not to change it, not to judge it, simply to notice it. The air entering, the air leaving, the small pause in between." At first, this seemed impossible. How could they hear their own breath over the sound of waves, over the rustle of other animals, over their own racing thoughts? But Meridian's voice was so steady, so calm, that something in each creature began to soften. Shoulders that had been held tight for months began to lower. Jaws that had been clenched began to relax. Tails that had been bristled began to smooth. Your breath has been with you since the moment you were born. It has never left you, not once, not ever. It is the most faithful companion you will ever know. and its sound, soft, gentle, constant, is the first sound you should learn to hear. Celia the deer found tears sliding down her face, though she couldn't say why. It had been so long since she had paid attention to something so simple, so natural. Her breath was like a lullaby she'd forgotten she knew. "Good," Meridian murmured. "Very good. Now continue breathing, and I will show you something wonderful."
Meridian rose slowly and made his way to his cave. When he returned, he carried a shell, a beautiful spiral shell, pearl white with hints of pink. "This shell," he said, "holds the sound of wind through beach grass on a spring morning. I collected it 47 years ago. Would you like to hear it?" Without waiting for an answer, he placed the shell on a flat rock and carefully removed the amber seal. Then he tilted the shell just so, and the sound emerged. It was extraordinary. The wind's voice was clear and pure, untainted by any other noise. It sang of freedom, of wide open spaces, of movement without effort. The sound seemed to expand the very air around them, making the beach feel vast and peaceful. Every animal listened, completely captivated. This wasn't just noise, this was music. This was the earth speaking in its truest voice. When the sound finally faded, dissolving back into silence, no one moved. They were each lost in the feeling the wind had created inside them, a feeling of lightness, of possibility. "How did you do that?" whispered a young fox named Jasper. "How did you catch the wind?" "I didn't catch it," Meridian corrected gently. "I simply listened until I heard nothing else. When your attention becomes so focused, so present, that the rest of the world falls away, that is when you truly hear. That is when any sound becomes a doorway to peace." Next, Meridian brought out another shell, this one smooth and round like a small moon. "This holds the sound of rain falling on still water," he said. "I collected it during the monsoon season many years ago now. It is one of my most precious sounds." He opened this shell, and the sound of rain emerged, soft, rhythmic, endless. Each drop created its own small music, and together they formed a symphony of patience. The rain had no agenda, no destination. It simply fell, completing its journey from sky to earth, from cloud to ocean. The animals felt their bodies relaxing even further. The rain song seemed to wash away their worries, their complaints, their need to be anywhere other than exactly where they were. A badger named Bertram, who had been especially stressed about food stores and winter preparations, felt his mind finally grow quiet. The rain taught him something he had forgotten, that nature had its own timing, its own wisdom. He didn't need to control everything. He only needed to show up, to do his part,
and trust that the rest would unfold as it should. The rain teaches patience, Meridian said quietly. It teaches us that some things cannot be rushed. A seed becomes a tree in its own time. A wound becomes a scar in its own time. Peace returns to a troubled heart in its own time. All we can do is be present for the journey.
As the moon rose higher, painting the beach in silver light, Meridian brought out a third shell, large and ridged, the colour of sunset. This shell holds something special, he said. It holds the sound of waves, yes, but not just any waves. These are the waves that wash the shore at twilight, when the world is balanced between day and night, between doing and resting. He opened the shell, and the sound that emerged was deeper, more rhythmic than the others. The waves rolled in with a steady pulse, eternal and unbreakable, in and out, like the breath of the earth itself. The animals felt something profound shift inside them. This sound touched a place deeper than thought, deeper than worry. It touched the part of them that knew, without words, that they were part of something vast and beautiful. They were not separate from the ocean, from the forest, from each other. They were all expressions of the same great mystery. Celia felt her heartbeat slow to match the rhythm of the waves. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. The waves had been rolling in and out for millions of years before she was born, and they would continue long after she was gone. There was something deeply comforting in that, the knowledge that the world was bigger than her small worries, that the earth knew how to sustain itself, how to heal, how to continue. The waves teach us about rhythm, he said, about the importance of cycles, of effort and rest, of activity and stillness. The ocean never tries to hold water permanently on the shore. It releases, it retreats, it returns. This is the wisdom of nature. This is how we were meant to live.
As the night grew deeper, Meridian continued to share his collection. A shell holding the creak of an ancient tree. A shell with the flutter of hummingbird wings. A shell containing the silence of snow falling in a winter forest. Yes, even silence could be collected. For silence was not the absence of sound, but a sound unto itself. With each shell, each sound, the animals fell deeper into a state of peace they had forgotten was possible. Their minds, which had been racing with problems and plans and worries, began to slow down. Space opened up inside them, space for wonder, for gratitude, for simple presence. The loud parrots, who had been among the most disruptive newcomers, found themselves weeping softly. They had been so busy shouting their opinions that they had forgotten to truly experience the world around them. Now, listening to the turtle sounds, they remembered what it felt like to be amazed, to be humbled, to be small in the best possible way. "I don't understand," said one of the parrots, his voice gentle now, stripped of its usual aggression. "Why do these sounds affect us so deeply? They're just wind, just rain, just waves. Meridian smiled, a barely perceptible lifting of his ancient mouth. They affect you because they are real. In your busy lives, you have filled your days with artificial urgency, with manufactured drama. You have forgotten what it feels like to simply exist without needing to prove anything or achieve anything or become anything other than what you already are. He paused, looking at each animal with eyes that held no judgment, only compassion. These sounds remind you of your true nature. You are not separate from the wind or the rain or the waves. You are made of the same substance. You follow the same rhythms. When you listen deeply to the natural world, you are listening to yourself, to the part of you that has never been lost or confused, the part that has always known how to rest, how to trust, how to be.
But we can't carry your shells with us, said Jasper the fox. When we go back into the forest, the noise will return. What do we do then? Ah, said Meridian, that is the true lesson. You don't need my shells. You only needed them to remember what has always been available to you. He settled himself more deeply into the sand, his shell sinking slightly, making him part of the beach itself. The sounds I collect are all around you, every moment of every day, he said. The wind still blows, the rain still falls, your breath still moves. What you need is not my shells, but the practice of listening. How do we practice? Asked Celia. Start small, Meridian said. Each morning, before you begin your day, sit still for just a moment. Listen to your breath. 5 breaths, that is all, just 5. Notice the sound of the air moving, the feeling of your body expanding and contracting. This simple practice will change everything. The animals leaned closer, not wanting to miss a single word. Throughout your day, Meridian continued, pause occasionally. Stop whatever you're doing and listen. Really listen. Not to the loud voices or the urgent sounds, but to the quieter ones. The rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, the hum of insects, the sound of your own footsteps on the earth. These sounds are always present, waiting to remind you to slow down, to return to the present moment. A rabbit named Clover raised a tentative paw. But what if we can't hear those quiet sounds because the loud ones are too overwhelming? Then you practice what I call choosing your sound. You cannot silence the whole forest, but you can choose which sound to give your attention to. If the monkeys are chattering and the parrots are squawking, you can choose to listen instead to the sound of your own heartbeat or your breath or a distant bird.
Where you place your attention determines your experience.
There is one more thing, Meridian said, his voice growing even softer, requiring the animals to become very still to hear him. The most important thing. You must learn to move slowly. Some of the younger animals shifted uncomfortably. Slow, in a world that demanded speed. I know this seems impossible in your busy lives, Meridian continued, but slowness is not laziness. Slowness is presence. When you move slowly, you experience your life instead of racing through it. When you move slowly, you notice things, small things, beautiful things, important things that you would otherwise miss. He gestured with one ancient leg toward the ocean. The waves move slowly. The tide changes slowly. The moon crosses the sky slowly. And yet they accomplish everything they need to accomplish. They are never late. They never miss their mark. Slowness is not about accomplishing less. It is about experiencing more. Meridian's words settled over the beach like a blanket. The animals felt them not just in their minds, but in their bodies, a deep cellular recognition of truth. When you return to your homes tonight, Meridian said, try walking half as fast as you usually do. Notice what happens. Notice how your breathing changes. Notice what you see that you normally wouldn't. Notice how it feels in your body to move without rushing. Bertram the badger spoke up, his voice thoughtful. I think I've been rushing my whole life without even realizing it. Even when I'm sitting still, my mind is racing ahead to the next thing and the next and the next. I'm never actually where I am. Yes, Meridian said warmly, that is the modern disease. The body is here, but the mind is elsewhere, in the past regretting, or in the future worrying. But life only happens in one place, right here, right now. The present moment is all we ever truly have.
As the night deepened further and the stars emerged in their countless thousands, Meridian made his way once more to his cave. The animals waited, peaceful now, content in the silence, no longer afraid of it. When Meridian returned, he carried no shell. There is one final sound I want to teach you about, he said, the most important sound of all. But it cannot be captured in a shell. He settled himself before the gathering, moonlight making his shell glow. It is the sound of your own presence, he said. When you become very still, very quiet, very present, you will begin to hear something extraordinary. Some call it peace, some call it stillness, some call it the sound of existence itself. It has no name that fully captures it, but once you hear it, you will recognize it as the sound you've been seeking your entire life. The animals closed their eyes, as they had learned to do, and listened. At first, they heard the usual things, the waves, the wind, their own breathing. But as they listened more deeply, something shifted. There was a quality to the silence that wasn't empty. It was full, rich, alive. It was the sound of being, the sound of awareness, the sound of the present moment holding them in its embrace. Celia felt tears on her face again, but these tears were different. These were tears of recognition, of homecoming. She realized she had been searching for peace in external things, a quieter forest, better circumstances, different neighbours, but peace had been inside her all along, waiting to be discovered. This sound, Meridian said softly, is always with you. It never leaves. No matter how chaotic your life becomes, no matter how loud the world gets, you can always return to this sound. It is your anchor. It is your home.
As the moon reached its zenith, Meridian closed his lesson. "Now," he said, "you may return to your homes, return to the forest, but you will not return as the same creatures who came here tonight. You carry something new with you now, a practice, a remembering, a key to peace that no one can take from you." The animals rose slowly, reluctantly, not wanting this magical night to end. But they knew Meridian was right. It was time to take what they had learned and live it. One by one they approached the ancient turtle, each offering their gratitude in their own way. Some touched their noses to his shell, some bowed, some simply stood before him in silence, their eyes speaking volumes. When they finally made their way back into the forest, something extraordinary happened. They walked slowly, as Meridian had instructed. They listened to the sound of their footsteps on fallen leaves. They noticed the way moonlight filtered through the canopy. They heard the rustle of wind in branches high above, and the forest, sensing this change in rhythm, seemed to respond. The frantic energy that had dominated for so long began to ease. Even the loud parrots found themselves speaking more softly. Even the boisterous monkeys found themselves taking pauses between their activities.
When morning came, Celia woke in her usual spot beneath a flowering bush. But this morning was different. Before leaping up to start her day, she remembered Meridian's teaching. She stayed still and listened to 5 breaths, just as he had instructed. The sound of her breathing was like music. How had she never noticed this before? Each inhale was a gift. Each exhale was a release. 5 breaths, and she already felt centered, calm, ready for whatever the day might bring. Throughout the forest, other animals were doing the same. The practice was spreading, quietly, naturally, like morning light spreading across the land. As the days passed, the forest transformed. It didn't become silent. Life is never silent, and that wasn't the goal. But it became balanced. There was still sound, still activity, still the full expression of life in all its forms. But now there were also pauses. Now there were moments of collective stillness. Now there was a rhythm that felt sustainable, nourishing. The newcomers learned from the old residents, and the old residents were reminded of what they had temporarily forgotten. A new culture emerged, one that valued presence as much as productivity, stillness as much as movement, listening as much as speaking.
Bertram the Badger discovered that when he worked more slowly, he actually accomplished more. He made fewer mistakes. He felt less exhausted at the end of the day. He found joy in tasks that had previously felt like drudgery. The parrots learned to appreciate silence between their words. They discovered that when they spoke less, others listened more. Their voices, used more selectively, carried more weight, more meaning. Jasper the fox found that his hunting improved when he moved with patience instead of aggression. The slower he went, the more aware he became, and awareness, he discovered, was the greatest skill of all. Young rabbits who had been anxious and fearful found courage in the practice. When fear arose, they would pause, breathe, listen to the sound of their own heartbeat. This simple act created space between the fear and their reaction to it. In that space, they found freedom. The forest became known throughout the region as a place of unusual peace. Animals from distant lands would make pilgrimages to see this community that had learned to balance activity with rest, sound with silence, doing with being.
Meanwhile, Meridian continued his practice unchanged. Each morning he made his way to the shore. Each morning he found a perfect shell. Each morning he waited with infinite patience for the right sound to arrive. His collection grew. The sound of autumn leaves falling on soft moss, the sound of a flower opening at dawn, the sound of the first raindrop after a long drought, the sound of the earth breathing. But now he had company. Young animals who wanted to learn his art would come and sit with him. He taught them that collection was not about possession, but about attention. The shells were simply tools for remembering, physical anchors for moments of profound listening. One young turtle, barely 30 years old, which is quite young for a turtle, asked Meridian why he continued collecting when he already had so many shells. Because each sound is unique, Meridian replied. The wind that blew yesterday will never blow exactly the same way again. The rain that fell last week will never fall with precisely that rhythm again. Each moment is unrepeatable, precious, worthy of attention. I collect sounds not to own them, but to honor them, to say, I noticed you. I witnessed your beauty. You mattered. The young turtle understood then that collection was an act of reverence, a spiritual practice, a way of saying yes to life in all its transient glory.
As years passed, Celia grew older. Her fawn spots faded, and she became a wise doe whom younger deer sought out for guidance. When they came to her with their worries and fears, she would teach them what Meridian had taught her. "Close your eyes," she would say. "Listen to your breath." And in that simple practice, she would watch transformation happen again and again. Bertram became known as the most skilled builder in the forest, not because he worked faster than others, but because he worked with presence. Every burrow he dug was a meditation. Every storeroom he created was an act of loving attention. His homes lasted generations. The parrots formed a choir. Once a week, they would gather at sunset and create harmonies that echoed through the forest, not loud or abrasive, but beautiful, intentional, clear. Their music became a gift to the entire community. These animals became what Meridian called wisdom keepers, creatures who carried the practice forward, who ensured that new generations would not lose what had been so precious in its rediscovery.
One evening, many years after that first gathering on the beach, Meridian sat at the edge of the water as he always did. His shell was even more weathered now, his movements even slower, but his eyes still held that eternal clarity. Celia, now old herself, came to visit him. She lowered herself carefully onto the sand beside the ancient turtle. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Meridian asked, though he knew. "For teaching us how to live," Celia replied. "For showing us that peace isn't something we need to search for elsewhere. It's something we can choose, moment by moment, breath by breath." Meridian was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was like the ocean itself, deep, calm, infinite. "I only reminded you of what you already knew," he said. "All creatures are born understanding how to be present. Watch a butterfly land on a flower. That is complete presence. Watch a bird build its nest. That is total attention. You knew this once. You only needed to remember." "Will you continue collecting sounds?" Celia asked. "For as long as I am here," Meridian replied. "But the most important collection is not in my cave. The most important collection is in the heart of each creature who has learned to listen. You are all collectors now. You collect moments of presence. You collect breaths of peace. You collect small eternities of wonder. That is the collection that truly matters." As the moon rose and painted the world in silver, Celia realized something profound. Meridian's teaching wasn't really about sound at all. It was about attention. It was about choosing, moment by moment, where to place your awareness. It was about the recognition that how you experience life is determined not by external circumstances, but by internal presence. The forest would continue to have challenges. There would be storms and droughts, disagreements and difficulties. Life would continue to be life, in all its complexity and unpredictability. But now the animals had a tool, a practice,
a way of meeting those challenges without losing themselves. They could pause, they could breathe, they could listen, they could choose presence over panic, stillness over reaction, awareness over automation. This was Meridian's true gift, not shells full of sound, but the remembering of an ancient art, the art of being alive, fully alive in the present moment. As Celia made her way back into the forest that night, she walked slowly. She listened to her footsteps. She felt the cool night air on her face. She heard the distant call of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. And in that moment, walking alone in the darkness, she felt completely at peace. Not because everything in her life was perfect, but because she was completely present for it. She was here, now, alive, aware, awake. That was enough. That was everything. Many seasons later, on a morning that seemed like any other, Meridian collected his final sound. He had risen at dawn, as always. He had made his slow journey to the shore, as always. He had found a perfect shell, a small spiral, pure white, beautiful in its simplicity, as always. And then he had settled himself down and waited for the sound that was meant for this shell. What came was something he had never heard before in all his long centuries. It was the sound of absolute silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of pure being. It was the sound that exists between heartbeats, between breaths, between one moment and the next. It was the sound of the present moment itself, stripped of all content, pure and empty and full all at once. Meridian captured this sound in the white shell. He sealed it with amber, and then he placed it at the very center of his collection, the heart of everything he had gathered. When the forest animals came to check on him that evening, they found him sitting in his cave, surrounded by his thousands of shells, a peaceful expression on his ancient face. He had passed on, as all creatures eventually do, but he had done so with the same presence and awareness that had characterized his entire life. His passing was not sad, but complete, a good ending to a well-lived life. The animals held a gathering to honor Meridian. They came from all parts of the forest, from the beach, from distant regions where his teaching had spread. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the waves, listening to the wind, listening to their own breath. Then Celia stood and spoke. Meridian taught us that every sound is sacred, she said. But he also taught us that the most important sound is the one we often ignore, the sound of our own presence, our own being. He taught us that peace is not a destination, but a practice. He taught us that life is not something to rush through, but something to be fully present for. She paused, looking around at the gathered creatures. His collection remains, she continued, but it is not ours to hoard. Each of you may take one shell, one sound, to remind you of this teaching, not to own, but to honor. And then you must return here once each season and replace that shell, taking a new one so that the collection continues to flow, continues to live, continues to serve all who seek peace. This felt right. This felt like what Meridian would have wanted. His collection not frozen in time, but dynamic, alive, continuing to teach. One by one, the animals approached the cave. One by one, they chose a shell. Some chose the sound of rain. Some chose wind. Some chose waves. Each creature was drawn to the sound they most needed to remember. Celia chose the white shell, the last sound Meridian had collected. She didn't open it, didn't listen to it. She simply held it, feeling its smooth weight in her hands, knowing that it contained something precious beyond words.
Life in the forest continued. Seasons changed. Young animals were born. Old animals passed on. The forest itself evolved, as forests do, constantly growing and changing and adapting. But the practice Meridian taught did not fade. It became woven into the culture of the forest, part of its identity. Young animals learned from their parents how to pause, how to breathe, how to listen. The gathering on the beach became an annual tradition, a time when the entire community would come together to practice collective stillness. The cave remained a sacred place. Animals would make pilgrimages there when they felt lost or overwhelmed. They would sit among the shells and listen, not to the sounds in the shells, but to the sound of that own presence. The cave had become a temple of attention, a reminder that peace was always available, always just a breath away. New wisdom keepers emerged with each generation, creatures who dedicated themselves to carrying the practice forward. They became teachers, guides, gentle reminders to those who had forgotten how to slow down, how to listen, how to be present. And always, always, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm. The waves rolled in and out, teaching the same lesson they had taught for millions of years, that life is a rhythm, a cycle, a dance between doing and being, between sound and silence, between striving and surrendering.
Decades passed, and Celia herself grew very old. Her legs, once so swift and sure, moved slowly now. Her coat, once glossy and bright, had faded to soft grey. But her eyes still held clarity, still held presence, still held the wisdom she had learned on that magical night so long ago. One evening, as she made her way down to the shore, walking slowly, feeling each step, breathing with awareness, she encountered a young rabbit who was trembling with anxiety. "What troubles you, little one?" Celia asked gently. "Everything," the rabbit said, her voice high and tight. "The forest is so busy. There's so much to do. I can't sleep. I can't eat.
I can't stop my mind from racing. I don't know what to do."
Celia smiled, recognizing herself in this young creature. How many years had it been since she had felt exactly the same way, and how far she had come since then? "Come," Celia said, "sit with me." They settled onto the sand together, the old deer and the young rabbit, side by side, facing the ocean. "Close your eyes," Celia said, her voice holding the same gentle authority that Meridian's once had. "Listen to your breath." And so it began again. The teaching passed from one generation to the next, the wisdom preserved not in words or rules, but in practice, in presence, in the simple act of paying attention. The rabbit's breathing gradually slowed, her small body relaxed, and in the space that opened up inside her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace.
That night, after the young rabbit had returned to the forest with the beginning of understanding, Celia sat alone on the beach. The moon was full, casting a path of light across the water, as if inviting her to walk to the horizon. She thought about Meridian, about his patience and wisdom. She thought about all the creatures he had touched with his teaching, all the lives he had changed simply by showing them how to listen. And she understood, finally and completely, what his true gift had been. It wasn't the shells. It wasn't even the sounds themselves. It was the revelation that everything we need to be at peace already exists within us and around us. We don't need to add anything, achieve anything, or become anything other than what we are. We only need to be present for the life we're living, right here, right now. The waves rolled in, steady and eternal. Celia listened to them with her whole being, not analysing, not thinking, just listening. And in that listening, she heard it, the sound that Meridian had spoken of, the sound that exists beneath all other sounds. It was the sound of pure presence, the sound of being alive, the sound of now. It had no beginning and no end. It was always here, always available, always waiting to be noticed. It was the sound of home. When dawn came, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Celia rose slowly from her place on the sand. Her body ached, as old bodies do, but her spirit felt light, unburdened, free. She made her way back into the forest, walking with deliberate slowness, noticing everything. The way morning light caught on spider webs, turning them into strings of diamonds. The way dewdrops trembled on leaves, each one holding a tiny world. The way birds were waking, their songs tentative at first, then gaining confidence as the sun rose higher. Each step was a meditation. Each breath was a prayer, not a prayer asking for anything, but a prayer of gratitude. Thank you for this moment. Thank you for this breath. Thank you for this life. In the forest, other animals were beginning their day with the same practice. A family of foxes sitting together,
breathing in unison, a badger pausing at the entrance to his burrow, listening to the morning sounds before beginning his work, young deer practicing stillness beneath the trees. This was Meridian's legacy, not just the shells in the cave, but this, a community that understood the sacred nature of the present moment, that valued presence as much as productivity, that knew how to find peace, not by escaping from life, but by showing up fully for it.
The white shell, the last sound Meridian had collected, sat in Celia's den, where she had kept it all these years. She had never opened it, never listened to the sound it contained. It had felt important to preserve it, untouched, as Meridian had left it. But now, on this morning, that felt somehow significant, she carefully picked up the shell. She held it in her hands, feeling its smooth surface, its perfect weight. Slowly, gently, she removed the amber seal. At first, there was nothing, just silence. But as she listened more deeply, holding the shell close, she heard it. The sound of absolute presence, the sound of the eternal now, the sound that exists in the space between heartbeats. It was impossible to describe, yet completely familiar. It was the sound she heard every time she became fully present. It was the sound beneath all other sounds, the foundation upon which everything else rested. Tears rolled down Celia's face as she listened. This was Meridian's final gift, a sound that couldn't be captured or contained, yet somehow he had done it. He had found a way to preserve the unpreservable, to bottle the essence of presence itself. Or perhaps, she thought, the shell was simply a mirror. Perhaps it reflected back whatever the listener brought to it. Perhaps the sound inside was the sound of her own awakened awareness. It didn't matter. Either way, it was perfect. As Celia's own time grew shorter, for she could feel her life reaching its natural completion, she began to teach the teachers. She gathered the wisdom keepers, those creatures who had dedicated themselves to preserving and sharing the practice. The teaching is simple, she told them, but simple does not mean easy. Every generation will need to relearn it, rediscover it, remember it. Our task is not to force the teaching on anyone, but to be living examples of it, to show through our own presence that peace is possible. A young owl named Ophelia asked, "But what if we forget? What if we lose our own practice?" "You will forget," Celia said gently, "many times. That is part of being alive. But the practice is patient. It waits for you. And when you remember to return to your breath, to return to the present moment, it welcomes you back without judgment. There is no failure in this practice, only forgetting and remembering, and both are necessary." She looked around at the gathered animals, seeing in their faces the same dedication that had burned in Meridian's eyes. The world will always try to pull you away from presence. It will tell you that you need to do more, achieve more,
become more. It will create urgency where none exists. It will fill your mind with worries about the future and regrets about the past. This is not a flaw in the world. This is simply what the world does. She paused, letting her words sink in. But you have a choice, always, in every moment. You can be swept away by that current, or you can drop anchor in the present. That anchor is your breath. That anchor is your awareness. That anchor is your willingness to simply be exactly as you are, exactly where you are.
On the last full moon of autumn, Celia called the entire forest community to the beach one final time. She was very old now, and everyone knew this would likely be her last teaching. They gathered as the sun set, painting the sky in magnificent colours. Young and old, prey and predator, newcomers and ancient residents, all came together in peace. Celia stood before them, her body frail, but her presence powerful. "I have lived a long life," she said, her voice soft but clear, "and I have learned that everything Meridian taught us can be distilled into one simple truth. This moment is enough. You are enough. Life, exactly as it is right now, is enough." She looked around at the sea of faces watching her. We spend so much time wishing things were different, wishing we were different, wishing the past had been different, or the future would be different. But in all that wishing, we miss the only thing that's real. This moment, right here, right now. A breeze moved through the gathering, rustling fur and feathers, and everyone felt it, the perfection of this simple moment. All of them together, all of them breathing the same air, standing on the same earth, alive under the same sky. Practice presence. Not as a way to escape life or to become something better. Practice it as a way of honoring the gift you've been given, the gift of being alive. Each breath is a miracle. Each moment is unrepeatable. Don't waste them by being somewhere else. She smiled then, a radiant expression that made her old face beautiful. And when you forget, because you will forget, simply remember. That's all the practice ever is. Forgetting and remembering. Forgetting and remembering, like waves rolling in and out. Be patient with yourself. Be kind to yourself. The practice is not about perfection. It's about presence. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Celia taught them one final practice, something Meridian had taught her on her very last visit with him, not long before he passed. "Lie down," she instructed, "on your backs, if you can. Look up at the stars." The animals arranged themselves on the sand, hundreds of bodies lying still, all gazing upward at the infinite cosmos. "The stars you see tonight," Celia said, her voice a whisper now, "have been shining for millions of years. Some of them may have already died, and we're seeing their light from the past. We are looking at time itself, at distance beyond imagining, at a universe so vast that our minds cannot comprehend it. She paused, letting them absorb this vastness. And yet, you are here. You exist. Against all odds, in all this cosmic immensity, you are present, conscious, aware. You are the universe looking at itself. You are stardust that learned to breathe, to wonder, to love. The animals felt something shift inside them, a profound recognition of both their smallness and their significance. This is the ultimate sound that Meridian collected, the sound of existence itself, and it can be heard not with ears, but with presence. When you are fully here, fully present, fully aware, you hear it, you become it. Silence settled over the beach then, deep and complete. Each animal lay under the stars, breathing, being, present. And in that moment, they understood everything. They understood why Meridian had spent his life collecting sounds. They understood why presence mattered. They understood that peace was not something to achieve, but something to notice, right here, always here, in the eternal now.
Celia passed peacefully in her sleep that night, after the gathering, surrounded by the forest she had loved and protected through presence. The community mourned her as they had mourned Meridian, but there was no despair. They had learned that death, like everything else, was part of the great rhythm, a wave returning to the ocean, a breath releasing, a completion that makes space for new beginnings. The practice continued. The beach gatherings continued. The cave of shells continued to serve as a sacred space for those seeking peace. And always new teachers emerged. A young deer who had learned from Celia, a fox who had discovered presence in his own way, an owl who taught nighttime meditation practices, a family of beavers who showed how work itself could become a moving meditation. The story of Meridian and his collection spread far beyond the forest. Animals from distant lands would make pilgrimages to walk the same shore he had walked, to sit in the same cave where he had kept his treasures, to learn the practice of presence that had transformed an entire community. But the true legacy wasn't in any one place or any one creature. The true legacy lived in every being who had learned to pause, to breathe, to listen, to be present. On quiet mornings, if you walked along that shore, you might see turtles searching for shells, young ones learning the art, practicing the patience, discovering the sacred in the ordinary. And if you listened very carefully, becoming very still, very present, you might hear it. The sound beneath all sounds, the music of existence, the eternal song that Meridian had devoted his life to collecting. It was always there, always available, always waiting. All you had to do was listen and breathe and be here now.